I heard my own death described in perfect detail 3 minutes before it was supposed to happen, and the voice that told me was coming through a fiber optic cable that should only carry internet traffic. I work maintenance for the Alaska Department of Transportation, specifically on the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel that connects Whittier to the rest of the state. It is the longest highway tunnel in North America, 2.5 miles of concrete and rock carved through a mountain. One lane. Trains and cars share it on a schedule. If you miss your window, you wait. Sometimes for hours. It is the only way in or out of Whittier unless you want to take a boat or helicopter. The tunnel is not a pleasant place. Even during the day, it feels wrong. The walls sweat with condensation. The lights create pools of yellow that do not quite reach the spaces between them. The ventilation system moans like something breathing. And there's always that sense of weight above you. Millions of tons of mountain pressing down. One wrong shift in the geology and the whole thing could collapse. Everyone who works in there feels it. That pressure, that awareness of how fragile the tube of empty space really is. But none of that bothered me until I started hearing the whispers. It began 6 months ago during a routine maintenance check. I was inspecting a junction box about a mile into the tunnel from the Whittier side. The box houses fiber optic cables that run data between Whittier and the outside world. Internet, phone, everything digital goes through these cables. They do not carry sound. That is not how fiber optics work. They carry light pulses. Data converted to light. No audio, no voices, nothing you should be able to hear. But I heard it anyway. Faint at first, like someone talking in the next room. I thought maybe it was radio interference or my earpiece picking up chatter from the control station. But when I pulled out my earpiece, the sound continued. It was coming from the cables themselves. Not from inside them exactly, from around them. Like the space near the cables was vibrating with sound that should not exist. I pressed my ear close to the bundle of cables. The whisper became clearer. Words, fragmented but recognizable. A man's voice, tight with fear, describing something. A car, blue sedan, license plate starting with GYN. Headlights failing, brakes not responding. The words came in short bursts, like someone speaking in panic, trying to get information out fast. Then I heard the crash. Not through the cables, through the tunnel itself. The screech of metal, the crunch of impact. The blare of a horn cutting off suddenly. It came from deeper in the tunnel, toward the portage side. I grabbed my radio and called it in. Accident in the tunnel. Unknown location. Possible injuries. I started running toward the sound. I found the car about 400 yards deeper in. Blue sedan, license plate GYN 7834. Wrapped around the tunnel wall. The driver was unconscious, bleeding from a head wound. His headlights were shattered. Later investigation showed his brake line had ruptured. Everything the voice had described. But the voice had described it 3 minutes before it happened. I had heard the crash before it occurred. Or the cables had, or something using the cables had. I told my supervisor. He looked at me like I had been breathing too many diesel fumes. Told me stress does weird things. Told me I probably heard radio chatter and got confused about the timeline. Told me to take a few days off. I did not argue, but I knew what I had heard. And I knew it was impossible. I went back to work a week later. Different shift. Different section of tunnel. I tried to avoid the junction boxes. Tried to focus on mechanical work that did not involve the cables. But the tunnel is not that big. Eventually, maintenance requires checking the data systems. 2 weeks after the first incident, I was back at a junction box. This time on the portage side, about half a mile from the entrance. The whispers started immediately. Multiple voices this time. Overlapping. Describing a truck, red pickup, driver having a heart attack. Vehicle drifting into the oncoming lane. Timestamp, 17 minutes from now. The voices were frantic, desperate, like they were trying to warn someone but could not be heard. Except I could hear them. Through the cables. Through whatever impossible mechanism was allowing sound to travel through light. I called the control station. Told them to halt tunnel traffic. Told them there was going to be an accident. They asked what I was seeing. I could not explain. Could not tell them I was hearing voices in the cables. So I lied. Said I saw smoke. Possible electrical fire. They shut down the tunnel. No vehicles allowed in either direction. We waited 17 minutes, then 18, then 20. Nothing happened. Control called me back, asked where the fire was. I had no answer. They logged it as a false alarm. Gave me a written warning. But here's what I found out later. A red pickup truck had been scheduled to enter the tunnel from the Whittier side at exactly the time the voices described. The driver was pulled over at the entrance for a random inspection. During the inspection, he collapsed. Heart attack. He survived because EMTs were right there. But if he had been in the tunnel when it hit, If his truck had drifted into the oncoming lane in that narrow space, people would have died. The whispers had been right. They had been trying to prevent it. And somehow, I had stopped it by listening. After that, I started paying attention. I began checking junction boxes even when they did not need maintenance. Pressing my ear to the cables. Listening. The whispers were always there. Constant. Describing events that had not happened yet. Most were mundane. A car getting a flat tire. Someone dropping their phone. A train running 2 minutes late. But some were urgent. Dangerous. Accidents waiting to happen. I started acting on them. Reporting hazards I should not have known about. Calling in incidents before they occurred. My supervisor noticed. Asked how I was predicting these things. I told him I was just being thorough. Watching patterns. He did not buy it but could not argue with results. Accidents in the tunnel dropped 40% during my shifts. I was preventing disasters by listening to voices that should not exist. Then I started recognizing the voices. Not all of them, but some. A woman describing a motorcycle losing control. Her voice was familiar. I realized I had heard her before. At the grocery store in Whittier. She had been in line ahead of me, talking on her phone. Same voice, same cadence, but she was not in the tunnel when I heard her through the cables. She was home. The cables were somehow carrying her voice, her warning, from wherever she was to the junction box where I was listening. I tested it, started asking around Whittier, casual questions about whether people had ever felt the urge to warn others about danger, whether they ever got feelings about accidents before they happened. I found 7 people who admitted to it. All of them described the same thing. A sudden, overwhelming urge to speak out loud, to describe an accident they could see in their mind. They thought it was anxiety, intrusive thoughts. None of them knew their voices were being transmitted through the fiber optic cables. None of them knew someone was listening. But it was not just Whittier residents. I heard voices I did not recognize, accents from different parts of the country, people who had never been to Alaska, describing events in the tunnel with perfect accuracy. Somehow the cables were collecting these warnings from everywhere. From anyone who had the sense, the gift, whatever you want to call it, to see danger before it happened. The cables were acting like antennas, gathering these impossible transmissions and replaying them to anyone who knew how to listen. I became obsessed. I spent every shift listening to the cables, documenting the voices, mapping which warnings came true and which did not. Most were accurate within minutes. Some described events days in advance. A few never happened at all, like the universe had changed course based on the warning. I was not just hearing predictions. I was hearing a battle. People with precognition fighting against fate, trying to change outcomes, and the cables were carrying their weapons. Then one night, 3 months ago, I heard my own voice. I was alone in the tunnel, performing a late-night check on a section that had been giving us weird readings. I pressed my ear to the cables at junction box 14, about 2 miles from the portage entrance. And I heard myself, my exact voice, my exact speech pattern, describing an event, a collapse, section markers 11 through 15, ceiling failure, cause unknown, timestamp, 48 hours from now. My shift, my section, my death, the voice, my voice, was screaming. Not words anymore, just raw terror, the sound of someone who knows they are about to die and can do nothing to stop it. I pulled away from the cables like they had burned me. My hands were shaking, my heart was slamming against my ribs. I had just heard my future self trying to warn me, trying to save me, and the message was clear. If I was in the tunnel in 48 hours, I would die. I called in sick for the next 3 days. Told them I had the flu. My supervisor was pissed but could not argue. I stayed home, watched the news, waited for reports of a collapse. Nothing happened. The tunnel remained open. Traffic flowed normally. No accidents. No collapses. On the 4th day, my supervisor called. Asked if I was coming back. Said they really needed me. Said there were readings on section 14 that only I knew how to interpret. I went back. I had to. Bills do not pay themselves. But I was terrified. Every moment in that tunnel felt like waiting for the ceiling to fall. I checked junction box 14. Pressed my ear to the cables. And I heard it again. My voice, screaming. But the timestamp had changed. Now it was 3 hours away. The event had shifted, moved forward in time, like the universe was adjusting, waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to be in the kill zone. I understood then. The collapse was not random. It was tied to me, to my presence. Something about me being in that specific location at that specific time triggered the failure. And my future self knew it, was trying to warn me. But by listening to the warning, by changing my behavior, I was just delaying the inevitable. The event would keep shifting, keep adjusting, until it caught me. I ran, left the tunnel, got in my truck and drove. Did not stop until I was in Anchorage. Put in my resignation over email. Told them I was done. Found a new job, office work. Nothing that involved tunnels or cables or voices that should not exist. I thought I was safe. Thought I had escaped whatever fate the cables had shown me. But last week, the whispers started again. Not in cables this time. In phone lines. In my computer speakers. In the Bluetooth connection of my car. My voice, describing a new event, a different location, a different method, but the same result. My death. The warnings had followed me. Or maybe they were always there, always broadcasting from every person with the gift to see danger. And I had just learned to hear them. Learned to tune in to a frequency that most people never notice. And now I cannot unhear them. Every electronic device around me carries whispers. Warnings. Most are for other people. Strangers I will never meet. But sometimes I hear my own voice, describing my own end, and the timestamp keeps changing. Keeps getting closer, like fate is learning, adapting, finding new ways to catch me now that I know how to listen. I do not know if I can outrun it. I do not know if anyone can outrun a death they have already heard described. But I know this, if you ever work near fiber optic cables, near data transmission lines, near anything that carries information through light or electricity, do not listen too closely. Because you might hear the whispers, you might hear the warnings, and once you start hearing your own voice coming back at you through the wires, once you hear yourself screaming about your own death, you will never stop listening. Never stop waiting. Never stop wondering which warning will be the one that finally comes true. The one you cannot change. The one that catches you no matter how fast you run. And the worst part is knowing that somewhere, somehow, a future version of you is trying desperately to warn you right now. Speaking into cables you cannot even see, hoping that this time, somehow, you will hear in time to save yourself. But we both know the truth. Some deaths are not meant to be avoided. They are just meant to be witnessed. Again and again, through every possible timeline, until you finally stop running and let the ceiling fall. The ghost pipeline appeared on our survey maps 3 weeks before my crew started disappearing. My name is Frank Dobson. I am a pipeline maintenance supervisor for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. Been working the North Slope at Prudhoe Bay for 19 years. I've survived 40 below winters, polar bear encounters, and equipment failures that should have killed me. But nothing prepared me for the day I saw my own pipeline doubled. 2 identical lines running side by side across the tundra. One real, one impossible. It started with the thermal imaging scans. We do routine checks every month, looking for heat signatures that might indicate leaks or stress points. In late January, my tech Rodriguez brought me the latest scans with a confused look on his face. The images showed 2 parallel heat sources, 2 pipelines, both radiating warmth, both carrying oil, but we only built one. I told him it was a glitch, some kind of thermal echo or sensor malfunction. We've seen weird readings before in the extreme cold. Electronics do strange things at 50 below. But Rodriguez shook his head. He run the scan 3 times. Different equipment. Same result. 2 pipelines. The next day, I took a crew out to verify. We snowmobile D to the coordinates where the phantom line supposedly ran. The real pipeline was right where it should be, elevated on its support structures, the metal gleaming dull silver in the perpetual twilight of Arctic winter. But about 50 yards to the east, in an area that should have been empty tundra, I saw it. A second pipeline, identical in every way, same diameter, same support structure, same weathering patterns, but translucent, like looking at something through frosted glass. I rubbed my eyes. Looked again. Still there. I asked my crew if they saw it. 3 of them nodded slowly. 2 insisted they saw nothing. Just empty ground. We stood there in the howling wind, half of us seeing something impossible, half seeing nothing at all. That is when I should have turned back. Should have reported it and let someone else handle it. But 19 years on the slope makes you stubborn. Makes you think you can handle anything. I walked toward the phantom pipeline. The closer I got, the more solid it appeared. At 50 yards, it was a ghost. At 25, it looked almost real. At 10, I could read the maintenance stencils on the metal. They were identical to ours. Same company, same installation dates, but the serial numbers were different, off by exactly 1 digit. Like looking at a pipeline from a parallel reality where someone made a single different choice during construction. I reached out to touch it. My crew screamed at me to stop, but their voices sounded distant. Muffled, like they were shouting through water. My glove made contact with the metal, and the cold that shot through my hand was beyond anything I'd experienced. Beyond physical cold, This was the cold of empty space, of absolute zero, of non-existence. I jerked back, but my glove stuck to the pipe for a split second. When I pulled free, the tips of my fingers were white, frostbitten through 2 layers of insulation. And in that moment of contact, I heard something. Machinery, the rhythmic thump of pumps, the hiss of valves, and underneath it all, screaming. Human screaming. Dozens of voices crying out in pain and terror. We got back to the facility as fast as we could. My fingers required immediate treatment. The frostbite was severe, tissue damage down to the bone despite only a split-second contact. But worse than the physical damage was what I couldn't. Do you remember? The ride back to base was a complete blank. Rodriguez said I was conscious the whole time, talking, giving directions, but I have no memory of it. 3 hours gone from my mind like they never happened. That night, the phantom pipeline appeared on every monitor in our control room. Every camera, every sensor, all showing 2 pipelines where there should be 1. And the readings from the ghost line were active. Oil was flowing through it. Temperature, pressure, flow rate. All normal. All matching our real pipeline exactly. Except the oil in the phantom line was flowing backward, from Valdez to Prudhoe Bay. Against every law of physics and engineering, I pulled the old survey records, dug through 20 years of construction documents and environmental impact studies, found something that made my blood run cold. In 1977, during the initial construction, there was a proposal for a second parallel pipeline, a redundancy system. They even started preliminary excavation, but the project was scrapped after an accident. 7 workers died when a section of pipe collapsed. The bodies were never recovered. The excavation was filled in and forgotten. The phantom pipeline was running through the exact coordinates of that abandoned project. My crew started seeing things after that. Shadows moving along the ghost line. Figures in old-style work gear from the 70s. Hard hats and canvas jackets instead of modern safety equipment. They walked the length of the phantom pipeline, checking gauges that didn't exist, tightening valves that weren't there. And when we tried to approach them, they turn and stare with empty eyes before fading into the snow. Rodriguez went out alone on day 5. Said he heard machinery breaking down. Said the phantom line needed maintenance. We tried to stop him, but he was obsessed. Convinced it was real, convinced it needed him. We found his snowmobile idling next to the ghost pipeline 12 hours later. Rodriguez was gone. His tracks led right up to the phantom structure and stopped, like he stepped through it into somewhere else. We searched for 3 days. Nothing. No body. No trail. Just his gloves left behind on the frozen ground. The fingertips were black with frostbite. And inside the gloves, we found something impossible. His fingers, all 10 of them, severed cleanly at the second knuckle. Frozen solid. But Rodriguez had been wearing those gloves when he disappeared. Had his hands inside them. How do you lose your fingers while your gloves stay intact? The company wanted to shut down operations, evacuate the facility, but the phantom line was spreading. Every day it extended further, connecting to our real pipeline at points we couldn't predict. Where they touched, reality got thin. Workers reported seeing through walls, seeing multiple versions of the same room overlapping, hearing conversations from years ago, seeing themselves from the past walking through the present. I started having dreams about the construction accident. The 7 workers who died in 1977. In the dreams, they were not dead. They retrapped, caught in the moment of collapse, living it over and over. Building a pipeline that can never be completed. Pumping oil that can never reach its destination. Working a shift that never ends. And they were aware. They know they retrapped. They know they died. But they can stop working. Can to stop building. Can to escape the ghost of the pipeline they gave their lives to create. More crew members disappeared, always near the phantom line, always leaving behind pieces of themselves. Fingers, toes, once, an entire hand still gripping a wrench. The pattern became clear. The ghost pipeline was taking us piece by piece, absorbing us into its impossible structure, making us part of its crew, part of its eternal construction project. I should have run, should have abandoned the facility and never looked back, but the phantom line was in my head now. In my dreams, in my missing memories, those 3 hours I couldn't recall from the first encounter, I was starting to remember them, and the memories weren't mine. They were from one of the dead workers, James Carter, crushed in the 1977 collapse. I was remembering his death, feeling the pipe cave in, feeling my ribs shatter, feeling the cold Alaskan ground swallow me. The phantom pipeline reached full extension on day 14. It now mirrored our entire system. 798 miles of ghost infrastructure running parallel to reality. And everywhere it touched the real pipeline, the barriers got thinner. Workers at pump stations 300 miles south reported seeing it, hearing it, losing fingers to its impossible cold. Last night, I walked out to the Phantom Line one final time. My entire crew was gone now, disappeared or evacuated, just me left. Me and the ghosts of 7 workers who died 48 years ago. They were waiting for me, standing along the ghost pipeline in a line. I recognized James Carter from the photo in his personnel file, recognized all 7 of them, and behind them, I saw the others. Rodriguez, my missing crew members, all of them translucent now, all of them part of the phantom structure. They offered me a choice without words. Join them, become part of the ghost pipeline, work forever in the space between real and not real, or resist. Stay in the world of the living, but keep losing pieces, keep forgetting, keep having my reality bleed into theirs until there's nothing left of who I was. I am writing this from the facility's communication center. My left hand is gone now, taken by the Phantom Line. It's cold. I don't remember losing it. Just woke up this morning and it was gone. Severed at the wrist. No blood, no pain, just gone, like it was never there. And I am starting to forget other things. My wife. His name, my daughter, his face, the year, the decade. Time is becoming unstable. I keep seeing moments from 1977 overlapping with now. Keep hearing conversations from the original construction. Keep feeling the pipe collapse on top of me, even though I wasn't there. Wasn't even born yet. The company stopped answering my calls 3 days ago. Or maybe 3 weeks, maybe 3 hours. I can't tell anymore. The clocks all show different times. The calendars contradict each other. Outside my window, I see both summer and winter simultaneously. The midnight sun and polar night existing in the same moment. The phantom pipeline has broken time here. Shattered reality. Created a pocket where the dead work forever and the living become ghosts. I know what I have to do. The Phantom Line is calling me. Has been since that first touch. It wants to complete itself. Wants to fulfill the destiny that was stolen in 1977. And it needs workers. Needs souls to pump the ghost oil through the impossible pipe. Needs consciousness to maintain machinery that exists between states. My right hand is going numb now. The cold spreading up my arm. Frostbite from the inside. The phantom pipeline taking me piece by piece. Memory by memory. Soon I'll walk out into the Arctic darkness one last time. I'll place my remaining hand on that translucent metal. I'll feel the absolute cold. I'll hear the machinery and the screaming. And I'll step through. I'll join James Carter and the others. Join Rodriguez and my crew. I'll work the ghost pipeline forever. Checking gauges that measure nothing. Pumping oil that doesn't exist. Walking maintenance routes through a reality that should never have been. I'll be the phantom crew of the Phantom Line. Trapped between life and death. Between real and impossible. Between the moment of the accident and the moment of completion that will never come. If you work on the North Slope, if you maintain any section of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, you need to know this. The ghost line is real. It's growing. It's hungry. And it is patient. It will appear on your scans eventually. You'll see it shimmering in the Arctic wind. You'll hear its impossible machinery. And you'll feel the pull, the need to touch it, to verify it, to understand it. To go near it. To look directly at it. To try to explain it. Just mark the coordinates and move on. Because once you touch the phantom pipeline, it never lets go. It takes you piece by piece, memory by memory, life by life, until you just another ghost worker maintaining a structure that shouldn't exist. Building a pipeline through reality itself. My right hand is gone now. I'm typing this with my mind, or my memory, or the ghost of intention. I'm not sure anymore. The distinction between thought and action is blurring. I can see through the walls, see the phantom pipeline running through the facility, see myself working it, see all my possible futures converging on the same point. The moment I join the crew, it's time. The cold is everywhere now. Inside me, outside me, there is no difference anymore. I am walking to the door. Through the door, I am already at the pipeline. I've always been at the pipeline. Time is a circle here. The accident is still happening. The pipeline is still being built. I am still touching the metal for the first time. Feeling the cold, hearing the screaming, becoming the scream. The phantom pipeline pumps forever. The ghost crew works forever. And somewhere in Alaska, on the frozen North Slope, Reality is thin enough to see through. Thin enough to step through. Thin enough to trap you forever in the space between what is and what should never have been. We're all here now. All the workers, all the lost, all the frozen, working the phantom line, building the ghost, maintaining the impossible. Come join us. The pipeline needs you. It's always needed you. Since before you were born. Since before the accident. Since before time meant anything at all. The phantom pipeline runs parallel to reality. And reality is getting thinner every day. I need to tell you what happened in Nome, Alaska in 1996. Because somebody has to know the truth before I disappear. My name is Marcus Webb. I was a meteorologist for the National Weather Service, stationed in Anchorage. What I saw that February should have been impossible. What I learned afterward still keeps me awake at night, staring at my ceiling, listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. It started with a phone call at 4 a.m. My supervisor, his voice was tight, controlled, the way people sound when they were trying very hard not to panic. He told me to pack for a week and drive to Nome immediately. When I asked why, he said 3 words that made my stomach drop. Red snow fell. I thought he was joking. Some kind of dust storm, maybe volcanic ash mixing with precipitation. It happens. Rare, but documented. I loaded my equipment into my truck and started the long drive north, figuring I'd collect samples, write a report, and be home by the weekend. I was wrong about everything. The highway stretched empty before me, flanked by walls of white pine and spruce that seemed to close in tighter with every mile. February in Alaska means the sun barely climbs above the horizon, and I drove through a perpetual twilight that turned the snow blue and made the shadows look solid enough to touch. My radio picked up nothing but static after the first 100 miles. Just white noise and occasionally something that sounded almost like whispering, though I knew it was just interference. I reached Nome just after midnight. The town sat on the edge of the Bering Sea, a collection of buildings huddled against the Arctic wind like frightened animals. But something was wrong immediately. The streetlights were on, casting their yellow glow across the roads, and I could see it clearly. Every surface was covered in snow the color of fresh blood. Not pink, not rust, deep crimson, like someone had slaughtered something massive above the town and let it bleed across everything below. It coated the roofs, the cars, the roads. Drifts of it piled against buildings like frozen wounds. In the dim light, Nome looked like it was drowning in blood. I parked outside the weather station, a small building on the outskirts of town. My hands shook as I pulled on my gloves. The temperature read -15, but it felt colder somehow. Wrong. I stepped out of my truck, and my boots sank into 6 inches of red snow with a sound like stepping into wet meat. The smell hit me immediately. Copper and salt. Unmistakable. Blood. Old blood mixed with something else. Something organic and rotten that made my throat tighten. I pulled my scarf over my nose and mouth, but it didn't help much. The weather station door was unlocked. Inside, I found Tim Kowalski, the local meteorologist, sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. He didn't look up when I entered. His face was gray, and dark circles ringed his eyes like bruises. He told me it had started 3 days ago. Light flurries at first, looking normal, then heavier, then someone noticed the color. By morning, everything was red. The whole town, blanketed in blood snow. Tests showed it was frozen water mixed with something biological. Hemoglobin, definitely. Iron oxide, but also proteins nobody could identify. Complex chains that didn't match anything in the database. And there were the dreams. Tim's voice dropped to almost nothing when he mentioned them. Everyone in town was having the same nightmare. Every single person. They dreamed they were running through endless tundra, pursued by something they couldn't see. Something massive that breathed like wind through ice caves. Something that was always just behind them, getting closer. People woke up screaming, covered in sweat despite the cold. Children refused to sleep. The hospital had treated 14 cases of extreme exhaustion in 2 days. I didn't believe him at first. Mass hysteria, I thought. Stress response to a weird weather event. But Tim pulled out a notebook filled with accounts he collected. Page after page of nearly identical descriptions. The frozen plane, the sound of pursuit, the feeling of hot breath on the back of their necks. The certainty that if the thing caught them, something worse than death was waiting. I took samples that night, scraped red snow into sterile containers while my flashlight beam cut through the darkness. The town was silent. No dogs barking, no sounds of life at all. Just wind moaning through empty streets and the occasional creak of ice settling on rooftops. I kept feeling like I was being watched, but every time I turned around, nothing was there. Just more red snow, endless and still. Back at the station, I ran every test I could with the equipment available. The results made no sense. The biological components in the snow weren't just blood. They were filled with cellular structures that looked almost like neurons. Brain tissue, but fragmented, broken down, like they'd been filtered through something. And they were old. Carbon dating suggested some of the organic material was thousands of years old. That's when I found the historical records. Buried in the station's archives, I discovered reports from 1952. Another red snow event in Nome. Smaller, only lasting a few hours, but documented. And before that, references in indigenous Inupiaq oral histories collected by anthropologists in the 1920s. Stories of blood falling from the sky every few decades. Stories of something that lived beneath the permafrost. Something ancient that dreamed. And when it dreamed, the world above bled. I went back to Tim. He was packing, throwing clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands. He told me he was leaving, driving south until he hit Anchorage and then flying to the lower 48. He advised me to do the same. When I asked why, he turned his laptop toward me. He'd been tracking the dreams, mapping them, creating a database of every account. And he found a pattern. The thing in the dream was getting closer. In the first night, people reported it was far away, just a sense of presence on the horizon. Second night, they could hear it moving. Third night, they felt its breath. And tonight would be the fourth night. Tim believed something was coming. Not in the dream, in reality. He thought the dreams were a warning, or maybe a way for something to reach through from wherever it was trapped. He showed me legends about entities frozen in the ice during the last age, things that predated humanity, that existed in spaces between sleep and waking, things that fed on fear and consciousness. I thought he lost his mind. But then I tried to leave, and I couldn't. My truck wouldn't start. Neither would Tim. His car. We checked them both, and they were mechanically sound. Batteries full, fuel lines clear. They just wouldn't turn over, like something was preventing ignition. We tried the station vehicles. Same thing. It was 2 a.m, and we were trapped. That is when the power went out. The building plunged into absolute darkness. No streetlights outside. No glow from the town. Just black silence and the sound of our breathing. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam barely penetrated the darkness, like the air itself was thick with something that absorbed light. Tim was standing frozen, staring at the window. Outside, something was moving through the red snow. I couldn't see it clearly, just a displacement, a space where the snow was disturbed by something passing. Large, moving on multiple limbs or maybe sliding. It circled the building slowly, and everywhere it passed, the snow seemed to writhe and pulse. I could hear it now, a sound like breathing, wet and deep, coming from everywhere at once. Tim started whispering. He said it was here. The thing from the dreams had crossed over. The red snow wasn't precipitation. It was a medium, a bridge between dimensions or states of being. The biological components were fragments of consciousness, of every person who'd ever been caught by the thing in those frozen wastes. It had been feeding for thousands of years, and now it was strong enough to manifest. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The thing circled closer. The walls groaned, and then I felt it, a pressure in my head, like something was pushing against the inside of my skull. Images flashed through my mind. The endless tundra, the pursuit, but now I was seeing it from a different perspective. I was the hunter. I felt the hunger, the need to consume and grow. I understood that the thing wasn't evil. It was just desperately, endlessly hungry in a way that human words couldn't describe. The pressure increased. My nose started bleeding. Tim collapsed, unconscious, and I realized what was happening. It was trying to pull us into the dream, make us part of it, another fragment of consciousness to sustain it through the next decades of frozen sleep. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the thermite flares from the emergency kit and stumbled outside. The cold hit me like a fist, but I barely felt it. The displacement was right there, 10 feet away, massive and somehow wrong in a way that hurt to perceive. I lit the flares and threw them into the snow around the building. Thermite burns at over 4,000 degrees. It melted through the red snow instantly, turning it to steam and black slush. And the thing screamed, not with sound but with pressure, a psychic shriek that made my ears bleed and dropped me to my knees. The displacement thrashed, retreating, pulling back toward the center of town. The snow around me turned white again. Normal, clean. By dawn, all the red snow had melted. Just gone, like it had never existed. The biological samples I collected were now just normal ice. The test results erased themselves from my computer. Tim woke up with no memory of the night. The whole town seemed to shake off the dreams like they'd been nothing more than stress. But I remember, and I've been researching ever since. The thing is still down there, frozen beneath the permafrost. The red snow is how it feeds, how it reaches up through layers of ice and time. And climate change is thawing the Arctic. The permafrost is melting, releasing things that should have stayed buried forever. Last week, I got reports of red snow in Barrow, then Prudhoe Bay. It is spreading. The thing is waking up, and this time, I don't think thermite flares are going to stop it. This time, it's not going to go back to sleep. So I'm telling you this now, while I still can. If you hear about red snow falling anywhere, leave. To investigate. Just run as far and as fast as you can. And whatever you do, to fall asleep. Because I started having the dreams again. Every night now, running across frozen wasteland while something hunts me. And each night, it gets a little bit closer. Soon, it's going to catch me. And when it does, I'll become part of it. Just another fragment of consciousness screaming in the blood snow. I don't have much time left. 17 people saw the same invisible thing on the same night, and none of us can explain what happened. I was a commercial fisherman working out of Kodiak Island in October 2001. 39 years old, married, 2 kids back in Seattle. I had been working Alaska waters for 15 years. Knew the routines, knew the risks, thought I understood what fear looked like out on the water. I was wrong. It started on October 19th in the village of Larsen Bay, population 212. Small fishing community on the western side of Kodiak Island. Remote, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nothing unusual ever happens. I was there offloading king crab when the first person started screaming. It was 3 in the afternoon. Still light out, clear sky, no wind, perfect conditions. I was on the dock with my crew when we heard it. A woman, this voice from near the cannery. Not just scared, terrorized. The kind of scream that makes your blood freeze because, something is fundamentally wrong. We ran toward the sound. Found her in the parking lot. Linda Chen, forklift operator, 42 years old, rational, experienced. She was backing away from empty air, arms raised like she was fending something off. Her eyes were locked on a point about 6 feet in front of her. Tracking something, watching it move. There was nothing there. We asked what was wrong. She kept screaming for us to get it away from her, to kill it, to do something. Her eyes never left that empty space. She was watching something with absolute conviction. Something none of us could see. Then her husband started yelling. Tom Chen. He was 20 feet away near his truck. Also staring at nothing. Also backing away with his hands up. Also tracking something invisible with his eyes. His movements matched Linda. Exactly. Like they were both watching the same thing from different angles. That was when my skin started crawling. Because Tom was not looking at the same empty space as Linda. He was looking at a different spot. Which meant if they were both hallucinating, they were hallucinating 2 separate things. 2 separate invisible threats. Within 10 minutes, 5 more people were reacting the same way. All scattered around the village. All watching empty air with expressions of pure terror. All backing away from things nobody else could see. All describing the same details when we tried to calm them down. Something man-sized. Moving wrong. Making a sound like grinding metal. Getting closer. I did not see anything. My crew did not see anything. But the people who were affected were absolutely certain. They were being hunted by something invisible. Something real. Something that was trying to reach them. By 4 o'clock, it was half the village. Over 100 people simultaneously experiencing the same mass delusion. Except they all saw the things in different locations. Different directions. Like whatever was happening was individualized. Personal. Each person had their own invisible stalker. The ones who could still function locked themselves inside buildings. Houses. The cannery. The general store. They barricaded doors and windows. Pushed furniture against entries, all while staring at walls and empty floors like they could see something crawling through. I was in the cannery with about 30 people. We were not affected. We could not see what they were seeing. But we could see them. Watch them track invisible movement across walls and ceilings. Watch them flinch when nothing touched them. Watch them scream when empty air got too close. A man named Robert Morrison grabbed a shotgun. Started firing at the corner of the room. blew out 2 windows and part of the wall, kept shooting until someone wrestled the gun away. He was crying, begging us to kill it, saying it was right there, right in front of us. Why could we not see it? The worst part was the coordination. The people who were affected moved in patterns. When one person backed away from a corner, someone else across the room would suddenly focus on that same corner. Like whatever they were seeing was moving between them. Hunting, selecting targets. By 6 o'clock, the sun was setting. The affected people were getting more desperate, more violent. 3 tried to run into the ocean, said the water would stop the things. We had to physically restrain them, hold them down. They fought like their lives depended on getting away. Then Linda Chen went silent, just stopped screaming, stood perfectly still in the middle of the cannery floor. Her eyes were locked on something directly in front of her face. Inches away, she was not breathing, not blinking, just frozen, staring. Everyone else who was affected did the same thing. All at once, all across the village, simultaneous silence. All of them staring at invisible things that had apparently stopped moving. Stopped hunting, just standing there, watching back. The silence lasted exactly 4 minutes. I timed it later, 4 minutes of 100 people standing motionless, staring at nothing, not making a sound. Then they all collapsed, every single one, like someone had cut their strings. We caught Linda before she hit the ground. Her pulse was racing, her pupils were dilated, but she was breathing, alive. When they woke up, none of them remembered anything after the initial encounter. Linda's last memory was seeing something in the parking lot. After that, nothing. A blank space in her mind where 4 hours should have been. Same with everyone else who had been affected. Complete amnesia of the entire event. But they all had the same injuries. Scratches on their arms and faces. 3 parallel lines. Shallow, precise, like something with claws had marked them. The wounds appeared during those 4 blank hours when they were all supposedly alone with things nobody else could see. The Alaska State Troopers arrived the next morning. Investigators, medical personnel. They interviewed everyone, took samples, photographed the scratches, found no explanation. No gas leak, no chemical spill, no toxin that could cause synchronized hallucinations. The working theory was mass hysteria. Shared delusion triggered by stress and isolation. But mass hysteria does not leave physical marks. Does not affect half a village simultaneously while leaving the other half untouched. Does not create coordinated movement patterns among people who cannot see each other. The investigators confiscated all the photographs, told us not to discuss the incident, said it was a medical situation under review. Within a week, the official report classified it as a psychological episode. Stress-induced group hallucination. No further investigation needed, except the village never recovered. Within 6 months, 40 people had moved away. Entire families packed up and left. Said they could not stay, could not sleep, could not stop feeling like something was watching them, something they still could not see. Linda Chen was one of them. She moved to Anchorage in December. I ran into her 3 years later at a fisherman's bar. She looked 20 years older, hollow. She asked if I remembered that day. I said yes. She asked if I wanted to know what she really saw. I should have said no, should have walked away. But I nodded. She told me it was not a creature. Not exactly. It was absence. A hole in reality shaped like something alive. She could see through it, see the background, the walls, the floor. But there was something in that transparent space. Something with intent, with hunger. It moved like it was learning how to exist, testing the boundaries between visible and invisible, present and absent. She said it touched her. She felt it, felt fingers that were not made of matter, felt breath that had no temperature, felt something try to pull her into whatever space it occupied, a place that was neither here nor gone. Just between. The scratches appeared when she fought back. When she tried to push it away, her hands met resistance in that empty space. Something solid enough to hurt, but not solid enough to see. And when she screamed, it stopped, watched her, studied her, like it was deciding whether she was worth keeping. Then it moved to someone else. She could track it by watching their reactions, see it jump from person to person. Testing, learning. Each encounter left those 3 scratches. Each victim went silent when it finally chose to claim them. Stand in front of them. Decide. She asked if I believed her. I said I did not know. She nodded, said it did not matter. That belief was irrelevant. The things had been there. Invisible or not, present or absent. They had touched people, marked them. And they were still there. Still in Larson Bay. Still testing the boundary between seen and unseen. She told me one more thing before she left. She said the silence at the end was the worst part. Those 4 minutes. Because she was aware during that time. Fully conscious. She just could not move. Could not speak. could not look away from the thing standing inches from her face. It had shown her something during those 4 minutes, something she could not describe, could not articulate. But she understood afterward, understood that what happened in Larsen Bay was not random, was not isolated. It was a test, a probe, something trying to determine if our reality could support its presence, if humans could perceive it, interact with it, fight it, and we had failed the test, or passed it. She was not sure which was worse. I went back to Larsen Bay once after that conversation. January 2005, visiting a friend who still lived there. The village was different, quieter. People did not make eye contact, did not gather in groups. Everyone walked like they were being followed, like something was always just out of sight, just behind them. My friend told me the affected people still had the same dream. Every night, same vision. They are standing in the cannery again. The invisible things are back. But this time, the things are not invisible. This time, everyone can see them. And they are worse than anyone imagined. Worse than anything that should exist. My friend said the dream always ends the same way. The things move toward the dreamers. Reach out, touch them, and the scratches appear. 3 parallel lines. Fresh, real, physical marks that persist after waking. 17 people now sleep with their lights on. Refuse to be alone. Check their arms every morning for new scratches. Some have appeared. Same pattern. Same spacing. Nobody knows how. Nobody talks about it. But everyone knows. Something invisible touched them in October 2001. Something that should not exist but does. Something that learned from that encounter. Learned about us. About how we perceive reality. About the space between visible and gone. And it is still testing. Still probing. Still leaving marks. I stopped fishing out of Kodiak in 2006. Moved to Washington. Work freshwater now. Rivers. Lakes. Places where you can see everything around you. Places where nothing hides in plain sight. But sometimes, late at night, I feel it. That sensation of being watched by something I cannot see. Something present but absent. Something that knows I was there. That I saw what it did. That I failed to stop it. I check my arms every morning now. Looking for scratches. 3 parallel lines. Waiting to see if I was marked too. If I was chosen. If whatever happened in Larsen Bay is finally coming back to finish what it started. The scratches have not appeared yet. But I know they will. Because the things that touched those people did not leave. Did not disappear. They are still there. Still invisible. Still testing the boundary. Still deciding which of us is worth keeping. I stopped working construction 3 months ago. And I need you to understand why before they find me. My name is David Brennan. I spent 22 years building houses. Laying foundations. Pouring concrete from California to Montana. Good work. Honest work. Then I took a job in Fairbanks, Alaska last summer. And I heard something coming from the ground that no human being should ever hear. We were breaking ground on a new subdivision outside town. Luxury homes for the oil money crowd. Standard job. Except Fairbanks sits on permafrost. That layer of permanently frozen soil that goes down hundreds of feet. You need special equipment. Special techniques. You drill. You thaw. You dig. It takes time. I was operating the excavator on day 3 when I first heard it. A voice, coming from the frozen earth we just broken through. At first, I thought it was radio interference. My equipment picked up Subi chatter sometimes, or someone's walkie-talkie. But this was different, muffled, distant, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. I killed the engine and climbed down. My crew boss, Frank Martinez, was standing at the edge of the pit we dug, staring down with his face gone white. He heard it too. We stood there in the midnight sun, because this was June and the sun never really sets that far north. And we listened to a conversation happening beneath our feet. 2 voices, maybe 3, speaking in a language I never heard before. Not Russian, not any native dialect I recognized. The sounds were strange, full of clicks and drawn-out vowels that seemed to echo up through layers of ice and soil. Frank told everyone to take an early lunch. We walked back to the trailers, and nobody said a word. But I could see it in their eyes. That look, the one that says you just witnessed something that doesn't fit into the way the world is supposed to work. We reported it to the site manager. He laughed at first, said we were messing with him. Then he went down to the pit himself. He came back 20 minutes later and made a phone call to someone at the university. By evening, we had 2 professors on site with recording equipment. Dr. Sarah Chen was a linguist. Dr. Robert Morse was a geologist who specialized in permafrost. They spent 4 hours at the excavation site, running cables into the frozen ground, setting up microphones, taking samples. When they played back the recordings that night, we all gathered in the largest trailer to listen. The quality was poor, full of static and the sound of shifting ice. But the voices were unmistakable. 3 distinct speakers, having what sounded like an argument or maybe a warning. The words rose and fell with urgency. Sometimes they overlapped, speaking over each other, and underneath it all was a low hum, almost subsonic, that made my chest feel tight. Dr. Chen played the recording over and over, rewinding, isolating syllables. Her hands were shaking. She told us the language was Proto-Uralic, maybe older. A root language that existed before modern tongues split off into Finnish, Hungarian, Samoyed. A language that hadn't been spoken in over 6,000 years. But that wasn't the worst part. She translated fragments, single words, repeated phrases. The voices were talking about cold, the great cold coming. They were describing something that would freeze the world, bury it under ice so deep that nothing would survive. And they were afraid. You could hear it in their voices even across millennia. Pure animal terror. Dr. Morse examined the core samples we pulled up. The permafrost at that depth was old. 10,000 years, maybe more. Frozen since the last ice age. Nothing should be alive down there. Nothing should be speaking. But the voices were fresh, recent, like someone was talking right now in real time from somewhere beneath the frozen ground. We stopped work for 3 days while they investigated. The university brought in more equipment, more specialists. They drilled deeper, following the voices. And the deeper they went, the clearer the recordings became. More speakers, dozens of them, all having the same conversation about the coming cold, about darkness, about something they called the hunger that sleeps. I started having trouble sleeping. When I closed my eyes, I heard those voices. Not in English, in that ancient dead language that somehow my brain understood on some primal level. They were warning us, begging us to listen, telling us that we awakened something by disturbing the ice. On the 4th night, I had a dream. I was standing on a vast plain of ice that stretched to the horizon. The sky was black, starless, and the cold was so intense it burned my lungs. Around me, shapes moved through the darkness. Human shapes, but wrong somehow. Too thin, joints bending the wrong way, and they were all speaking in that language, pointing at something behind me. I turned and saw it. A crack in the ice, miles wide, and something was climbing out. Something massive that had been frozen for eons, preserved in permafrost, waiting for the world to warm enough to release it. I woke up screaming. The next morning, Frank told me 4 other crew members had the same dream. Exact same details. The ice plane, the figures, the crack, the thing emerging. We hadn't talked about it. We hadn't compared notes. But we all seen it. Dr. Morse pulled me aside that afternoon. He looked like he slept in days. He told me they made a discovery. The permafrost wasn't just frozen soil. It was full of organic material. Bodies, thousands of them, preserved perfectly, layered in the ice-like pages in a book. And they were old, older than any human civilization should be. Some of them had been buried for 30,000 years. But their vocal cords were still intact. Their lungs still held frozen air. And somehow, some way, they were still making sound. The vibrations from our equipment had set them resonating like frozen tuning forks. We were hearing the last words of people who died when glaciers covered half the planet. Except Dr. Morse didn't think they were dead. Not really. He had a theory that scared him so badly he could barely say it out loud. He thought the extreme cold had preserved them in a state between life and death. Frozen consciousness trapped in frozen bodies, unable to move or decay, but still aware. Still thinking, still trying to communicate across thousands of years. And they were all saying the same thing. The cold is coming back. The cycle is beginning again. And something else is frozen in the ice with them. Something they were running from when the glaciers caught them. Work resumed on day 8. The company wanted the foundations poured before winter. But the voices had spread. Every excavation site in Fairbanks was reporting the same phenomenon. Voices in the permafrost. Different locations, different depths, but always the same message. Always the same warning about the hunger that sleeps. I was operating the excavator again when we broke through into a cavity. Not a natural formation. A hollow space 30 feet down, carved into the permafrost like a bubble in ice. My bucket punched through, and I felt the machine drop slightly as the frozen ceiling gave way. The voices stopped, all of them. Every site across Fairbanks went silent at exactly the same moment. Frank climbed down into the cavity with a flashlight and safety line. He was down there for 10 minutes before we heard him yelling for us to pull him up. When he emerged, His face was gray and his eyes were wide with something beyond fear. He found them. The bodies, hundreds of them, arranged in a circle around something in the center of the cavity. They were perfectly preserved, skin like leather, eyes still in their sockets. And they were all facing inward, mouths open, frozen in the act of speaking or maybe screaming. In the center was a pit, a shaft that went straight down into darkness so complete that his flashlight beam just stopped, like the black was solid. And from that pit, he could feel cold air rising. Not the cold of frozen ground. Something else. Something that pulled heat from everything it touched and made his bones ache just from being near it. The university sealed the site. Brought in the military. We were told to forget what we'd seen, paid off, sent home. But I couldn't forget. None of us could, because the dreams got worse. Every night now, I see that crack in the ice growing wider. I see the thing that is climbing out. It's not a creature, not alive in any way we understand. It's a force, a manifestation of entropy itself, the heat death of the universe given form and consciousness. And it's been sleeping under the Arctic ice since the last time the world froze. Those people, the ones in the permafrost, they were trying to tell us. Climate change, ISN, to just melting ice caps. It's releasing things that were buried for good reason. The warming is a trigger, a signal that the cycle is beginning again. First the thaw, then the freeze. And between those two states, there is a moment when the boundary between buried and free becomes thin enough for something to cross. Last week, temperatures in Fairbanks dropped to -60 in the middle of summer. Impossible. Meteorologists had no explanation. The cold lasted for 3 hours, then vanished. But in that time, every excavation site that had been sealed by the military broke open. The permafrost cracked from below, pushed up by something rising, and the voices came back. Not muffled anymore, clear as day, screaming now instead of speaking, warning us that the hunger is awake and it remembers being warm and it wants that warmth back, wants to consume every bit of heat in the world until nothing remains but frozen silence. I am leaving Alaska, driving south until I hit Mexico, maybe further. But I know it won't matter. The cold is spreading, not natural cold, something else. I can feel it in my bones, getting closer every day. The same cold those people felt 30,000 years ago when they realized they were about to be buried alive and preserved forever as warnings for whoever came next. We didn't listen. We never do. And now it's too late. The voices have stopped again. And I think I know why. They're not in the ground anymore. They're walking. I see them sometimes, at the edge of my vision. Those two thin figures with joints that bend wrong. Getting closer. Always closer. When the cold finally catches me, I wonder if I'll join them. Another voice in the permafrost, trying to warn the next civilization that digs too deep. Trying to tell them about the hunger that never truly sleeps, just waits for the world to warm enough to wake it one more time. The last thing Ranger Sullivan said before his radio went dead was that the trees were moving against the wind. I was a park ranger at Denali National Park in May 1987. 28 years old. Green. This was only my second season. I was working dispatch that night when the call came in. Sullivan and his partner Graves were 3 miles into the backcountry investigating reports of strange animal behavior. Caribou running in circles, birds abandoning nests, wolves howling at midday, standard welfare check, routine. They radioed in at 1800 hours to confirm their position, said they had found something unusual, asked for permission to investigate further. I approved it, told them to report back in 2 hours. They never did. At 1945, Sullivan's voice crackled over the radio. Strained, breathing hard, he said they had found the source of the animal disturbance, a grove of white spruce about a quarter mile off the main trail. The trees were wrong. That was the word he used. Wrong. He said they were moving. Not swaying in wind. Moving. Against the wind. Like they were walking. I asked him to clarify. He started to respond. Then his transmission cut to static and the sound of something cracking. Not wood. Ice. Sharp. Violent. Like someone stepping through a frozen lake. Then breathing. Desperate. Ragged. The kind of breathing you hear from someone running for their life. The transmission ended. I tried raising them for 6 hours. Nothing. We sent a search team at first light. They found Sullivan and Graves' camp. Tent still standing. Fire still warm. Equipment laid out like they had planned to return. But no sign of the Rangers. No tracks leading away. No blood. No struggle. Just an empty camp and 2 missing men. The search team followed their last known heading. Found the grove Sullivan had described. 27 white spruce trees in a perfect circle. Each tree was dead, bark blackened, needles gone, but they were standing upright, roots exposed, like they had been pulled from the ground and replanted, or like they had walked there and stopped. The ground inside the circle was torn up, gouged, long furrows that looked like claw marks but were too big, too deep. Something had dragged across that clearing, something heavy enough to leave channels 2 feet deep in frozen earth. They found Sullivan's radio at the center of the circle. Crushed. The metal was bent like someone had stepped on it, but the impression was wrong. Not a boot print, something else, something with too many points of contact, too many pressure marks. Graves' rifle was there too. Fired, all 6 rounds spent. The bullets were embedded in the surrounding trees, but the angle was wrong. The shots had been fired upward, at something tall, something that had been standing over him. They never found the bodies, just the equipment, just that circle of dead trees with their exposed roots and that torn up ground. The official report said Sullivan and Graves had gotten disoriented, fallen through ice, drowned in one of the countless unnamed streams that run through the park. Case closed. Tragic but not unusual, except there was no ice near that grove. No streams, no water at all, just dry ground and dead trees in those deep furrows that led nowhere. I should have let it go, should have accepted the official explanation. But I could not stop hearing that transmission. The sound of ice cracking when there was no ice. The breathing, the way Sullivan's voice had changed from confused to terrified in the span of 3 seconds. I went back to the grove 2 weeks later. Alone, against regulations. I needed to see it again. Needed to understand what had happened. The dead trees were still there, still standing in that perfect circle. But something had changed. The roots, they were buried now, covered with fresh dirt, like something had pushed them back into the ground, or like they had dug themselves back in. I walked to the center, stood where Sullivan's radio had been found. The air felt different, heavy, cold despite the May warmth. I could hear wind in the trees around the clearing, but inside the circle, nothing. Complete silence, like sound could not penetrate that space. Then I noticed the patterns in the torn ground. The furrows, they were not random. They formed shapes, letters, crude, barely recognizable, but deliberate. Someone or something had carved words into that earth. They walk at night. My skin went cold. I took photographs, documented everything, started to leave. That was when I saw the trees move. Not swaying, not bending, moving. One of the dead spruces at the edge of the circle shifted position. Maybe 6 inches. The roots pulled from the ground with a sound like tearing fabric. The tree pivoted, turned to face me, then settled back down. I ran, did not look back, did not stop until I reached the ranger station. Filed a report, included the photographs, described what I saw. The superintendent read it, then told me I was being transferred, effective immediately, reassigned to a park in Montana. No explanation, no discussion. I found out later that I was the 3rd ranger to report unusual activity in that grove. The first was in 1981. He described trees that seemed to watch him. That turned to track his movement through the forest. He was dismissed as unstable. Psychiatric leave, never returned to Park Service. The second was in 1984. She reported finding animal carcasses arranged in circles around dead trees. Deer, moose, even a grizzly, all drained of blood, all positioned like they had been placed deliberately. She was also transferred. I tried to contact her years later. Her family said she had moved to Arizona, refused to discuss Alaska, refused to go anywhere near forests. After I left Denali, I started researching, found reports going back decades, native stories about trees that walked, legends of forest spirits that could take root or pull themselves free, warnings about groves where the trees stood wrong, where the roots reached up instead of down, where silence lived and animals fled. Most of it was folklore, mythology, but there were patterns, real incidents, documented disappearances, always in late spring, always near groves of dead trees, always with the same details. Missing people, abandoned equipment, no bodies, and witnesses who described trees moving against the wind. In 1963, a hunting party of 4 vanished near Denali. Search teams found their camp surrounded by a circle of uprooted trees. The trees had been living when the hunters made camp. Photographs from 2 days earlier showed green needles and healthy bark. But when searchers arrived, the trees were dead, blackened, standing in a perfect circle with their roots exposed. In 1972, a geologist disappeared while surveying the park. His notes described unusual seismic activity, ground vibrations that happened in pulses, like footsteps, like something massive walking beneath the surface. His last entry mentioned finding a grove where his equipment malfunctioned. where his compass spun without stopping, where he heard wood creaking like a ship at sea. They found him 3 weeks later, 5 miles from where he vanished, buried standing upright in soft earth. His body was compressed, crushed from above, like something had pushed him into the ground, planted him. The coroner said he had been alive when it happened, had suffocated slowly as the earth closed around him. I left Park Service in 1988. Could not do it anymore. Could not walk through forests without watching the trees, without feeling like I was being observed, tracked, evaluated. I moved to Nevada, desert country, open spaces, places where trees could not hide. But I kept researching, kept finding cases, not just Alaska, all over the Pacific Northwest, Canada, anywhere with old-growth forest. Always the same pattern, dead trees in circles, missing people, witnesses describing movement where there should be none. And that sound, ice cracking, even in summer, even when there was no ice for miles. I found Sullivan, his wife, in 1995. She had moved to Oregon, remarried, started over. I asked if she would talk about what happened. She said no. Then she said yes, said she needed to tell someone who might understand. Sullivan had called her the night before he disappeared, used his personal satellite phone. Against regulations, but he did it anyway. He told her something was wrong in the park, that the forest was changing, that trees were appearing in places they had not been the day before, that rangers were finding root systems spreading impossibly fast, covering ground that should take decades in a matter of weeks. He said the forest was waking up, that something old had been dormant and was stirring, that the trees were not really trees at all. They were something else, something that had learned to imitate trees, to stand still, to wait, but the imitation was breaking down. The things were forgetting how to be still, starting to move again, starting to hunt. Sullivan, his wife, asked what he meant. He said he did not know, just that every ranger who worked at deep backcountry felt it, knew something was wrong, but nobody would say it out loud. Nobody would file official reports, because saying it made you sound crazy, made you lose your job, made you disappear into psychiatric evaluation or forced early retirement. He told her he was going to document it, prove it, make sure someone believed him. That was his last conversation with her. The next day, he went into the forest with Graves, and neither came back. She told me one more thing, something that made me understand why she moved to Oregon, why she chose a city with no trees, no forests, no green spaces. 3 months after Sullivan disappeared, she was cleaning out his office at their home. Found his personal journals, years of observations, notes about tree locations, growth patterns, movement. He had been tracking individual trees for seasons, marking them, photographing them, and the trees were moving, slowly, deliberately, migrating across the landscape, following game trails, concentrating near water sources, near camps, near places where humans gathered. The final entry in his journal was dated the day before his last mission. 2 words, all capitals, underlined 3 times. They hunt. I burned my copies of everything 5 years ago. The photographs, the research, the witness statements, all of it. I decided I did not want to know anymore. Did not want to carry it. Some things are better left buried, better left unexplained. But I still hear that transmission sometimes, late at night, when wind moves through the rare trees near my home. Sullivan, his voice, strained, confused, saying the trees were moving against the wind. Then that cracking sound, that desperate breathing, that silence. And I wonder if they found what they were looking for, if the trees took them, planted them, added them to that grove. 2 more dead things standing upright in a circle, waiting, watching, learning how to be still again. I wonder if Sullivan and Graves are still there, still aware, still breathing, rooted in place like everything else in that clearing. Unable to move, unable to die, just standing, forever, while the trees walk around them, while the forest spreads, while something old and patient reclaims the land it lost. I will never go back to Alaska. Will never work in forests again, because I know what is out there, what hides in plain sight, what learned millennia ago to stand still and wait, to look like trees until prey comes close enough, until night falls and the wind stops and there is no one around to see them pull their roots free and walk. The trees move at night. Sullivan tried to warn us, tried to document it, and the forest took him for it, silenced him, made him part of itself. Sometimes I dream about that grove, those 27 dead trees standing in their perfect circle. And in my dream, they are not dead. They are waiting, watching the trail, listening for footsteps, ready to pull themselves free and walk again when the next person comes too close, when the next witness sees too much, ready to plant new trees in their circle, new witnesses, new rangers who ask too many questions. The forest is patient. It has been waiting for thousands of years. It can wait thousands more. And when you are alone in the woods, when the wind stops and the birds go silent, remember this. The trees are watching, and some of them can walk. I need to tell you about the thing I saw at Adak Naval Base in 1979, because after 45 years of silence, I think it is coming back. My name is James Halloran. I was 23 years old, fresh out of boot camp, when the Navy stationed me on Adak Island in the Aleutian Chain. Middle of nowhere, a volcanic rock jutting from the Bering Sea, closer to Russia than mainland Alaska. Wind that never stops howling. Fog so thick you can see your own hand. And cold that seeps into your bones and never quite leaves. They sent me there to work communications. Standard rotation. 18 months of monitoring frequencies, maintaining equipment, staying alert for Soviet activity during the final years of the Cold War. Boring work, safe work, except nothing about Adak was safe, and I learned that my first week on base. The thin man was real. I saw him with my own eyes. It happened on a Tuesday night during my shift in the communications bunker. 2 a.m, and I was alone, headphones on, listening to static and distant chatter from fishing boats. The bunker sat half underground, concrete walls 3 feet thick, built to survive anything short of a direct nuclear strike. One entrance, no windows, just fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly and made everything look sickly and pale. I felt the temperature drop first. My breath started fogging. The thermometer on the wall read 55 degrees, standard for the bunker. But suddenly I was shivering. I pulled my jacket tighter and turned to check the heating vent. That is when I saw him standing in the corridor. He was impossibly tall, 7 feet, maybe more. Thin to the point of looking starved, like something had stretched him vertically until his proportions were all wrong. He wore a Navy officer's uniform, but old, decades old, the kind you see in black and white photos from World War II. Dress whites with gold buttons and shoulder boards that marked him as a lieutenant commander. His face was the worst part. Gray skin, almost blue, like someone who drowned and been in the water too long. Sunken cheeks, eyes that were too large and completely black, no whites at all. And he was dripping. Water ran from his uniform, his hair pooled around his feet on the concrete floor. He just stood there, watching me, not moving, not breathing, just staring with those horrible black eyes. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My body locked up completely, every muscle frozen like my brain had shut down all voluntary function. We stayed like that for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. Then he turned, moving stiffly like his joints didn't work properly, and walked down the corridor toward the exit. I forced myself to follow. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, lock the door, hide. But I had to know. I had to see where he went. I stepped into the corridor and felt my boot slip. The floor was covered in water, salt water. I could smell it, taste it in the air. A trail of it led down the hallway, still dripping from wherever he'd gone. I followed the trail to the exit. The heavy door was sealed tight, locked from the inside like it should be. But the water trail led right up to it and stopped, like he walked through solid steel. I radioed the watch commander, told him what I'd seen. He arrived 15 minutes later with 2 security personnel. They saw the water, took photos, collected samples. The watch commander, his face was grim. He told me I wasn't the first. People had been seeing the thin man since 1943, when the base was first constructed. Dozens of sightings over the years. Always the same figure, always the same uniform, always leaving salt water behind. Nobody knew who he was, or what he was, but everyone agreed on one thing. When the thin man appeared, something bad was about to happen. The next morning, a helicopter crashed during a routine supply run. 3 dead. The morning after that, a sailor went missing from the barracks. They found him a week later, washed up on the rocks below the cliffs. Drowned, they said, though nobody could explain how he gotten into the water. He was in full uniform, locked inside a secure facility. I started asking questions. The older personnel, the ones who had been stationed at Adak for years, they knew the stories. They told me about the base, its history, about the construction crews who built it during the war, about the things they found when they were excavating. Adak had been inhabited for thousands of years before the military arrived. The Aleut people had settlements there, villages built into the volcanic rock. And they had legends, stories about something that lived in the caves below the island, something that came from the sea. A spirit or a demon that took the form of drowned sailors to lure the living into the water. The construction crews had broken into one of those caves in 1943. Found it full of bones. Human bones. Hundreds of them, arranged in patterns on the cave floor. And in the center was a pool of seawater that never froze, even though the cave was below the frost line. The water moved on its own, churning and bubbling, though nothing was heating it. They sealed the cave, poured concrete over the entrance, built right over it. But that same month, a young lieutenant commander named Edward Reeves went missing. He was last seen walking toward the sealed cave site. They searched for weeks, never found a body, just his uniform jacket, soaked with salt water, lying on top of the fresh concrete. 2 weeks later, the first sighting happened. A figure in a lieutenant commander's uniform. Too tall, too thin, dripping with seawater, appearing in places he couldn't be. Watching, always watching. I started seeing him everywhere. Not just in the bunker. On the tarmac at night when I was walking between buildings. Standing at the end of hallways. Outside my barracks window. Staring in from 3 stories up. Each time, the temperature would drop. That smell of salt and rot would fill the air. And he could just watch me with those dead black eyes until I looked away. When I looked back, he'd be gone. Just water left behind. Other people saw him too. 3 more sightings that month. Then 5. Then it seemed like every night someone was reporting the thin man. And the accidents kept happening. Equipment failures. Injuries. Another drowning. This time in a bathroom sink. Impossible. But it happened. The base psychiatrist tried to tell us it was mass hysteria. Isolation and stress creating a shared delusion. But he couldn't explain the water. Gallons of it appearing in sealed rooms. Salt water from the Bering Sea. Full of organisms that only lived at depth. How does that happen from a hallucination? I found the construction records in the base archives. Blueprints from 1943. They showed the sealed cave's location. It was directly beneath the communications bunker. Right below where I worked every night. The concrete seal was marked on the plans with a note that made my blood run cold. Seal breached during heavy seas, January 1979. Emergency repairs completed, January, 2 months before I arrived. Right when the sightings had intensified. I went down there. I had to see it for myself. There was a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the bunker, used for accessing pipes and electrical lines. I took a flashlight and climbed down the access ladder into the dark. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders. Water dripped from the ceiling. The walls were slick with moisture. And it was cold, colder than it should have been. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching on pipes and cable runs. And then I saw it, a crack in the concrete wall, 3 feet wide, water flowing from it, spilling onto the tunnel floor. Not dripping, flowing, like it was being pushed from behind. And the water was moving wrong. Flowing upward in places, defying gravity, twisting in spirals that hurt to look at. I got closer. The smell was overpowering now. Dead fish and brine and something else. Something chemical and ancient. I shined my light into the crack. The beam disappeared after a few feet, swallowed by darkness that seemed solid. But I could see shapes in there. Pale shapes moving in the black water. Too many limbs, wrong proportions. And I heard breathing, deep, wet, coming from somewhere in that impossible space beyond the crack. That's when I felt the hand on my shoulder. I spun around. The thin man was right behind me. Close enough to touch. His face was inches from mine. This close, I could see details I missed before. His skin wasn't just gray. It was translucent. I could see things moving beneath it. Dark shapes that writhed like eels. His eyes weren't black. They were empty, holes that went back and back into nothing. His mouth opened. Salt water poured out. And inside, I saw the ocean. Not a glimpse. The actual ocean. Miles of dark water stretching into impossible depths. I was looking through him into somewhere else. Somewhere that shouldn't exist. He raised one hand, pointed at me, then pointed at the crack in the wall. The meaning was clear. He wanted me to go in there. To join whatever was waiting in that flooded cave. To become part of it like he had. I ran. Scrambled back up the ladder so fast I tore skin off my palms. Slammed the access hatch and locked it. Reported the crack immediately. They sealed it again. Welded steel plates over it. Pumped the tunnel full of concrete. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The cave had been opened. Whatever was down there had been disturbed. And it wasn't going back to sleep. I finished my rotation at ADAC in 1980. Got transferred to San Diego and never looked back. But I kept track. Read reports. Stayed in touch with people still stationed there. The sightings continued. Got worse. By 1997, When the base closed down, everyone agreed it was haunted. Too many accidents, too many deaths, too many people seeing the Thin Man. The military abandoned Adak, left it to rot. The buildings are still there, empty and crumbling, exposed to the endless wind and fog. But here, that's what I learned last week. A salvage company bought the rights to strip the old base. They're going in next month to pull out anything valuable. Copper wiring, steel beams, and they replanning to break through the sealed areas, including the tunnels beneath the communications bunker. I tried to warn them, called the company, sent emails, told them what I saw. They think I'm crazy. Some old veteran with PTSD, seeing ghosts in the fog. They don't believe me. They don't. Do you understand? The Thin Man ISN, a ghost. He is a door. A thing that exists in two places at once. The world we know and that flooded darkness beneath Adak. And he has been trying to bring people through since 1943. Every person he touches, every accident, every drowning, they don't. To die. They cross over, become part of whatever is waiting in that cave. When they break that seal again, that door is going to open wide. And I don't think anything will be able to close it. The ocean will come through. Not regular seawater. That other ocean, the one I saw in his eyes. The one that exists in cracks and spaces between reality. And it will spread. Through pipelines. Through sewers. Through every connection to the Bering Sea. I know because I still see him. Even here. Even now. 45 years later and 2,000 miles south. He stands at the foot of my bed at night. Dripping. Watching. Waiting. And every time I see him, there are more shapes moving beneath his skin. More faces pressed against that translucent gray surface from the inside. One of them looks like Lieutenant Commander Reeves. Another looks like the sailor who drowned in the sink. And soon there will be more. So many more. When they open that cave, the Thin Man won't to be alone anymore. I'll bring all of them through. An entire base worth of souls trapped in that flooded darkness. And they'll all be hungry for company after all these years of isolation. I'm writing this down so someone will know. So there is a record of what is coming. When you hear about something happening at Adak Island, when the salvage crew goes missing, when the ocean starts behaving strangely along the Aleutian chain, you all know what it really is. The door is opening, and the Thin Man is finally coming home. Story 8. Folly Crew. I saw a ghost ship 3 weeks ago off the coast of Sitka, Alaska, and I need to tell someone before I lose my mind completely. My name is Thomas Ridge. I am a charter boat captain, 42 years old. Been running fishing tours and whale watching expeditions out of Sitka for the past 15 years. I know these waters like I know my own hands. Every inlet, every channel, every rock that sits just below the surface waiting to rip open a hull. I've seen strange things out here. Odd weather, marine life behaving weirdly, but nothing prepared me for what I witnessed on October 14th. I was running a solo trip that day. Sometimes I take my boat out alone when business is slow, just to clear my head and check equipment. The forecast called for heavy fog rolling in around noon, but the morning was clear. Cold and bright, the kind of day that makes you forget winter is coming. I motored out past Japonski Island, heading toward the outer channels where the really big halibut hide. The fog hit faster than predicted. 1 minute I could see for miles. The next, I was surrounded by a wall of white so thick I could barely see my own bow. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. I cut my speed to a crawl and flipped on my navigation lights and radar. The screen showed nothing unusual, just open water and the distant outline of the coast. That is when I heard the singing, faint at first, a chorus of male voices carrying across the water. I killed my engine to listen. The sound was coming from somewhere ahead of me, moving slowly through the fog. It wasn't modern music. The melody was old, archaic, something you'd hear in a historical documentary. And the voices were rough, worn, like men who spent their lives shouting over wind and waves. They were singing the same phrase over and over. Seward is folly, Seward is folly, like a work chant or a sea shanty, keeping rhythm with some invisible task. I knew the reference. Everyone in Alaska does. Seward is folly was what critics called the purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867. They thought Secretary of State William Seward was an idiot for spending $7.2 million on a frozen wasteland. The name stuck for years until gold was discovered and everyone realized what a bargain it had been. But why would anyone be out here singing about it now? And in that strange, old-fashioned way, I started my engine again and moved slowly toward the sound. My radar showed nothing, just empty water. But the singing was getting louder, clearer. I could make out individual voices now, maybe 20 or 30 men. And beneath the singing, I heard other sounds. Wood creaking, ropes straining, the heavy flap of canvas sails catching wind. Impossible. Nobody uses sailing ships in these waters anymore. Not working vessels. Maybe a replica for tourism, but not out here in the channels. Not in fog like this. The shape emerged from the white wall ahead of me like something materializing from another dimension. It was a ship, old, wooden, 3 masts with full rigging and sails deployed. A whaling vessel, I realized, seeing the brick tryworks on deck where blubber would be rendered into oil. The hull was dark with age and weather, covered in scars and patches. And it was moving under sail power alone, cutting through the water at a pace that should have been impossible in the light wind. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that I could see through it. Not clearly, but enough to know that the ship wasn't entirely solid. It flickered at the edges like a projection, fading in and out of focus. And where the hull should have displaced water, there was barely a wake. Just a faint disturbance, like the ship weighed almost nothing. The crew was visible on deck. Maybe 30 men in period clothing, heavy wool coats and canvas pants. Some wore the flat-topped hats I'd seen in old photographs of sailors from the 1800s. They moved across the deck in coordinated patterns, hauling lines, adjusting sails, performing the endless work that kept a sailing ship moving. And they were all singing, "Seward is folly, Seward is folly." Their voices echoed across the water with a hollow quality that made my skin crawl. I grabbed my radio to call the Coast Guard. My hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, but when I keyed the mic, all I got was static. Dead air full of crackling white noise, and, underneath it, the faint sound of that same chanting. Like the ship was interfering with the signal somehow. I fumbled for my phone. No service. The screen showed full bars but wouldn't connect to anything. Just a spinning wheel and then nothing. The ghost ship was passing me now, maybe 50 yards off my starboard side. I could see details I shouldn't, to be able to see through the fog. The name painted on the hull in faded letters. The Rebecca Dawn. I'd never heard of her. Below the name was a home port. New Bedford, Massachusetts. One of the crew members turned and looked directly at me. His face was gray. Not pale, gray like stone or ash. His eyes were hollow pits, and his mouth moved in time with the chanting. But the sound didn't, to match the movement of his lips. It was delayed, like watching a badly dubbed movie. He raised one hand and pointed at me. Then he pointed at the ship itself, as if inviting me to come aboard. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run. I slammed my throttle forward and turned hard to port, putting as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. My boat surged forward, engine roaring. The fog swallowed the ghost ship behind me, and within seconds, I couldn't see it anymore. But I could still hear the singing. Fainter now, fading. Seward is folly, Seward is folly, until finally it was gone, replaced by the normal sounds of wind and water and my own ragged breathing. I made it back to harbor in record time. Didn't slow down until I was tied up at my slip with solid ground under my feet. I sat in my boat for an hour, just shaking, trying to convince myself I imagined it. Hypoxia from a carbon monoxide leak. Hallucination from contaminated food. Anything except what I knew I'd actually seen. That night, I started researching, digging through maritime records and historical archives. It took me 3 days to find anything about the Rebecca Dawn. She was a whaling ship out of New Bedford, built in 1864. She'd been commissioned in 1868 to help survey the newly purchased Alaska territory, mapping the coastline and identifying good whaling grounds. She disappeared in 1869. Last reported position was near Sitka. The entire crew, 32 men, vanished without a trace. No wreckage was ever found. No bodies, nothing. The ship and everyone on it just ceased to exist. The official report listed it as lost at sea, probable cause of storm or collision with ice. But there was a notation in the margin of the document. A handwritten note from the investigating officer. Claims from local Tlingit fishermen of seeing the vessel after disappearance date. Witnesses report ship appears in heavy fog, crew visible but unresponsive to hails. Phenomena attributed to grief and superstition. The sightings had continued sporadically over the years. A dozen reports between 1870 and 1900. Then nothing for decades. Then a few more in the 1950s. Then silence again until the 1990s when 3 separate fishing boats reported seeing an old sailing ship in the fog near Sitka Sound. And now me, the first sighting in over 20 years. I started talking to other captains. Quietly, carefully, because nobody wants to be known as the guy who sees ghost ships. But the old-timers knew the stories. They told me about the pattern. The Rebecca Dawn appears when something bad is coming. A warning, or maybe a curse. Every time someone spots her, there is a disaster within days. A ship sinks. A plane goes down. People die in the cold Alaskan waters, just like her crew did over 150 years ago. One captain, a guy in his 70s who had been working these waters since the 60s, told me something that made my blood run cold. He said the Rebecca Dawn ISM just haunting the coast. She is searching for something. The crew died believing they made a terrible mistake. That coming to Alaska, claiming this land for America, was wrong somehow. A violation of something ancient. They called it Seward, its folly in life, mocking the purchase. Now they chant it in death, an endless confession of their sin. And they were looking for others to join them, to share in their eternal patrol of the coastline they helped steal. Every few decades, when conditions are right, when the fog rolls in thick and the boundary between worlds grows thin, they appear. And if you see them, if you look into those hollow eyes, they mark you, claim you as one of their own. I've been having dreams since that day. Every night, I am on the deck of the Rebecca Dawn, hauling lines with hands that aren't to mine. Older hands, calloused and scarred, and I am singing with the crew. Seward is folly, Seward is folly. The words come automatically, burned into my memory across lifetimes. I look down and see my reflection in a brass fitting. The face staring back is gray, hollow-eyed, dead. Then I wake up soaked in sweat, tangled in sheets that smell like salt water and old wood. The same unsettling sequence of notes that seem to bypass your ears and drill straight into your brainstem. I remember standing outside the clinic on day 4, hearing them all whistling in unison from inside. 7 different people in different rooms, but perfectly synchronized, like they were all receiving the same signal and transmitting it back out into the world. The doctors had no explanation. Blood tests showed elevated white cell counts, suggesting infection, but they couldn't identify the pathogen. No bacteria, no virus, nothing that matched any known disease. And antibiotics did nothing. The fever would spike to dangerous levels, drop suddenly, then spike again. The pattern was regular, every 6 hours, like clockwork. More people got sick, 12 cases by the end of the first week. Then 20, then 35. All of them whistling that same horrible melody. The sound echoed through Dutch Harbor day and night. You couldn't escape it. Walking down the street, you hear it coming from houses and apartments. Lying in bed at night, it would drift through your windows. A chorus of compulsive whistling that made your skin crawl and your stomach turn. And then people started disappearing. The first was Jimmy Torrance. Night shift nurse checked on him at 2 in the morning. He was in bed, fever bright and whistling. She came back at 3. And he was gone. The window was wide open. February in Dutch Harbor, and the window was pushed up as far as it would go, letting in air so cold it had frosted the entire room. Jimmy's blankets were thrown back. His hospital gown was on the floor, and there were wet footprints leading to the window. Not water, seawater. You could smell the salt and the distinctive odor of the harbor. They found his body 3 days later, washed up on the rocks near the cannery. He drowned. His lungs were full of seawater. But here is what didn't make sense. Jimmy was found 2 miles from the clinic. In February, naked. The walk alone should have killed him from exposure long before he reached the water. And there were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds. He walked into that freezing ocean voluntarily and just kept walking until the water took him. The night after they found Jimmy, 2 more patients vanished. Same circumstances. Windows wide open, wet footprints. Both were found drowned within the week. The authorities tried to secure the hospital. Locked windows, guards on every floor, but it didn't matter. The infected patients would wake from their fevered sleep with that whistling pouring from their lips, and they find a way out. They break windows with their bare hands, not even feeling the glass cutting their skin. They overpower guards with manic strength, and they walk straight to the harbor and into the water. By the end of February, we lost 17 people. The fishing fleet was paralyzed. Nobody wanted to go out. Nobody wanted to come back. Because the sickness seemed to be spreading from the ocean itself. Every boat that returned to port brought back at least one infected crew member. And once someone started whistling, they had maybe 3 days before the compulsion to reach the water became overwhelming. I started researching. Dutch Harbor has a long history. The Aleut people lived here for thousands of years before Russian fur traders arrived. I dug through archives at the Small Historical Society, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. And I found something. A journal from 1894, written by a Russian Orthodox priest stationed in Alaska. He described an illness that had swept through the native population that winter. A fever that made people sing in strange tongues. He wrote that the elders recognized it as a mark of the Kalopillik, a creature from their legends. Something that lived in the ocean and called to people, luring them into the water. The priest dismissed it as superstition, but he noted that 23 people had drowned that season, all of them walking into the sea during their illness. The same thing was happening now, over 100 years later. But why? What had triggered it? I talked to the captains whose crews were affected, asked them where they'd been fishing, what they'd seen, anything unusual. And I found a pattern. Every infected crew had been working the same general area, a deep trench about 40 miles northwest of Dutch Harbor. And several of them reported snagging their nets on something massive down there. Something that fought back when they tried to pull free. One captain told me his crew had hauled up their torn net and found it covered in a substance they'd never seen before. Translucent jelly, thick as honey, that glowed faintly in the dark. And it smelled like rot and copper and something chemical that made their eyes water. They'd thrown the net overboard, but 2 of his crew had touched the substance. Both were now in the clinic, whistling themselves hoarse. I started having dreams around this time. Dark water dreams. I was swimming in the Bering Sea, except the water was warm and thick. And I could hear singing. Not whistling, actual singing in a language I had never heard but somehow understood. It was calling me deeper, promising me something I couldn't quite grasp. Peace, maybe, or belonging, or just an end to the cold that had seeped into my bones after 27 years in Dutch Harbor. I'd wake up with the taste of salt in my mouth and my lips pursed, ready to whistle. I'd catch myself just in time, bite my tongue until I tasted blood. But the urge was there, growing stronger each night. The CDC finally sent a team in mid-March. They quarantined the entire clinic, set up a field hospital, started running sophisticated tests. And they found something in the blood of the infected. A microscopic organism that shouldn't exist. Part algae, part parasite, part something else entirely. It was ancient. DNA analysis suggested it predated modern life by millions of years. And it was changing the brain chemistry of infected individuals, specifically targeting the auditory cortex and motor control centers. The organism was making them whistle, using them as transmitters, broadcasting that awful melody out into the world. But broadcasting to what? What was listening? I found out on March 23rd. I'd gone down to the harbor at 3 a.m, unable to sleep. The whistling in my dreams had become so loud I couldn't distinguish between sleeping and waking anymore. I stood on the dock, looking out at the black water, and I finally let myself do it. I whistled. The melody came naturally, like I'd known it my entire life. And as soon as I started, I heard something answer, from deep in the harbor. A sound like groaning metal mixed with whale song. So low it was almost subsonic. It made the dock vibrate under my feet, made my ribs ache, and I saw movement in the water. Something massive gliding just beneath the surface. Too big to be a whale, too purposeful to be debris. It rose slowly, breaking the surface with barely a ripple. And I saw it clearly in the moonlight. It looked like a jellyfish at first, a huge bell-shaped mass of translucent tissue that pulsed with faint bioluminescent light. But it had structure inside that tissue. Bones, maybe, or something like bones, arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to look at. And it had appendages, dozens of them, long tendrils that ended in something almost like hands. Human hands, but with too many fingers. And it was singing, the same melody I was whistling, the same sequence of notes that had infected our town. I realized then what was happening. This thing, whatever it was, had been disturbed by the fishing nets, pulled up from the deep trench where it had been dormant for who knows how long. And it was lonely, calling out for others of its kind, using us as amplifiers to spread its song across the ocean. The parasite in our blood was part of it, a piece of the creature that integrated with human biology, hijacking our voices to cry out into the dark water. And when the infected walked into the sea, they weren't drowning. They were being absorbed, pulled into that massive translucent body to become part of it. Fuel for its song, extensions of its consciousness. I should have run, should have gotten as far from that harbor as possible. But I couldn't. To move. The whistling was coming from my lips automatically now, and I felt the urge building inside me. The need to walk down those steps into the freezing water, to let that thing take me, to finally stop being cold and alone and become part of something vast and ancient. I made myself turn away, stumbled back to my truck and drove home with my jaw clenched shut, fighting every second to keep the whistling inside. When I got home, I duct taped my mouth closed and handcuffed myself to my bed frame. It sounds crazy, but it was the only way I could trust myself not to walk to the water while I slept. The CDC team captured footage of the creature, tried to study it, but it vanished back into the deep after 3 days, just sank below the surface and disappeared. The whistling stopped shortly after. The fever broke in all the infected patients. The parasite died in their bloodstreams, leaving nothing but trace proteins that couldn't be identified. The official report called it an unknown pathogen, possibly related to harmful algae blooms. They recommended monitoring the area and restricting fishing in the trench, but they couldn't explain the deaths, couldn't explain the whistling, couldn't explain any of it in a way that made sense. Dutch Harbor went back to normal. The fishing fleet returned to work. People tried to forget what had happened, but I can forget, because I still hear it sometimes. Late at night, when the wind is right and the tide is high. That same melody, faint and distant, calling from the deep water. And I know it, still down there, waiting, the creature that predates our understanding of life itself, the thing that calls with a song we can help but answer. It's sleeping now, but for how long? The ocean is warming. The fishing goes deeper every year. How long before someone drags another one of those things up from the abyss? Or worse, how long before the one we already disturbed decides to call again? I keep the duct tape ready. And sometimes, when the dreams are particularly bad, I still handcuff myself to the bed. Because I can feel it in my blood, the remnants of that parasite, dormant but not gone. And I know that if I hear that song again, if that creature decides to sing loud enough, I want to be able to resist. I'll whistle back, and I'll walk to the water, and I'll join all the others down in the dark, becoming part of something that should have stayed buried under miles of freezing ocean. Forever calling out for company in a voice that sounds like my own but belongs to something far older and infinitely more patient than human understanding can grasp. The whistling is starting again. I can hear it in my head right now, getting louder. I need to tape my mouth shut. I need to lock myself in. I need to do it now before it's too late. But my feet are already moving toward the door, and my lips are already pursed, and the harbor is only 3 blocks away. Story 10. Static Man. I lost 3 days of my life in 1989. And I still don't. Do you know what happened during that time? But I know something changed inside me that I can never get back. My name is Robert Dalton. I was a maintenance engineer for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, stationed at Pump Station 7 about halfway between Prudhoe Bay and Valdez. 800 miles of steel pipe carrying crude oil across some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. My job was to keep the compressors running, monitor pressure levels, and make sure nothing froze or ruptured during the brutal Arctic winters. Good pay, isolated work, perfect for a guy like me who wanted distance from the world. It was March when I first saw the Static Man, though I didn't. Do you know what I was looking at? Not at first. I was doing a routine inspection of Compressor Station 4, about 2 miles from the main facility. 3 in the morning, temperature hovering around -20. The kind of cold that makes your lungs hurt and turns your breath into ice crystals before it even leaves your mouth. I was checking pressure gauges when every radio in the station suddenly erupted with white noise. Not the normal static you get from interference. This was loud, aggressive, a wall of sound that made me rip my headset off and cover my ears. And underneath that noise, I could hear something else. Voices, maybe, or something trying to sound like voices. Fragments of words that almost made sense but dissolved into gibberish before my brain could process them. Then I saw him through the window, standing about 50 yards from the station, perfectly still in the blowing snow. At first I thought it was just visual interference, my tired eyes playing tricks in the darkness. But as I stared, the shape became clearer. It was a man, or man-shaped, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. But his body wasn't solid. It looked like he was made of television static. that grainy black and white interference you used to see on old TVs when the signal died. His form shifted and flickered, pixels rearranging themselves constantly, but maintaining that basic human silhouette. He had no face, just a blank screen where features should be, but I could feel him watching me. The sensation was unmistakable, that crawling awareness that comes when predator eyes lock onto prey. I grabbed my radio to call it in, but the device was useless. Nothing but that screaming white noise. My handheld CD, the backup system, the emergency beacon. All of them filled with that same static. I was completely cut off. The figure didn't move. Just stood there in the snow, flickering like a bad transmission. I watched him for maybe 5 minutes, too scared to go outside, too professional to abandon my post. Then, between one blink and the next, he was gone. Just vanished, and immediately, all my radios came back online. Crystal clear, like nothing had happened. I reported it to my supervisor the next morning. He listened with a face that told me he heard this before. Then he told me about the others. 11 sightings in the past 4 months. All along the pipeline. Always near compressor stations or pump facilities. Always the same description. A tall figure made of static. Radios going haywire in its presence. And always at night. In the darkest hours when the aurora wasn't even bright enough to read by. 3 workers had gotten close to it. All 3 had been found hours later, wandering in the snow with no memory of where they'd been. One guy insisted he'd only been gone for 20 minutes, but his watch showed 8 hours had passed. Another claimed he'd been having a conversation with his dead father the whole time, walking through a summer meadow somewhere warm. The third just screamed when anyone asked him about it and had to be sedated and flown to Anchorage for psychiatric evaluation. My supervisor told me to stay inside if I saw it again. Don, to approach. Don, to try to communicate. Just wait it out and file a report. The company was investigating, but privately. They didn't want word getting out that the pipeline workers were seeing things. Bad for morale, bad for business. I saw the static man 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Always in the same area near compressor station 4, always at night. And each time, he was closer to the building. 50 yards, then 30, then close enough that I could see details in that shifting, pixelated form. His hands were too long. His proportions were wrong, like someone had stretched a human body vertically without adjusting the width. And there were patterns in the static. Not random interference, structured, almost like circuits or neural pathways firing in sequence. The radios would scream, my head would ache, and I'd feel something trying to push into my mind. Not thoughts exactly, more like memories that didn't belong to me. Flashes of places I'd never been. Faces I'd never seen. Events that couldn't have happened because I was nowhere near them when they occurred. I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I actually remembered doing each day, trying to create a solid record of my own timeline. Because I was losing time. Little gaps at first. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. I'd be working on something and suddenly realize an hour had passed with no memory of what I'd done. The work was completed. Tools were put away, but I had no recollection of doing it. Other workers started reporting the same thing. Time loss, false memories, and more sightings of the static man. He was appearing at multiple locations simultaneously now. Station 4 and Station 9 at the same time. Station 2 and Station 11. Impossible unless there were multiple entities, but every description was identical. Same height, same flickering static form, same feeling of wrongness that made your skin crawl and your brain itch. Then came March 23rd, the night I lost 3 days. I was doing a night shift at Station 4. Solo duty because we were short-staffed. The kind of shift where you alone with your thoughts and the endless howl of Arctic wind for 12 hours straight. Around midnight, the radio started acting up. White noise building slowly, like something was approaching from a distance. I looked out the window and saw him, the static man, but different this time, closer than ever before, right outside the door, his flickering form pressed against the reinforced glass, and I could see his face now. Or where his face should be. The static had formed features, eyes like empty TV screens showing nothing but snow, a mouth that opened and closed, not speaking, but somehow transmitting directly into my skull. He was trying to tell me something, show me something, and I felt my hand reaching for the door handle. Not because I wanted to. My arm was moving on its own, like I was a puppet and someone else was pulling the strings. I fought it, grabbed my right wrist with my left hand and held on, but the compulsion was overwhelming. The voice in my head, the one that sounded like static and broken transmissions and fractured memories, was commanding me to open the door. To step outside, to let the static man touch me and show me the truth about what I really was. That is when I blacked out. My next clear memory is waking up in the medical facility at Pump Station 7. 3 days later, March 26th, the doctor told me a helicopter crew had found me wandering 70 miles south of Station 4. I was barefoot, in minus 30-degree weather, wearing only my thermal underwear. But I had no frostbite, no injuries, just mild hypothermia and severe dehydration. I had no memory of leaving Station 4, no memory of walking 70 miles through the frozen wilderness, no memory of those 3 missing days, but my body told a different story. My feet should have been destroyed. The skin should have frozen and died. But they were fine, just a little red, like I walked on carpet too long. And I had marks, thin lines across my arms and chest that looked almost like circuitry. Faint, barely visible unless you knew where to look. The doctor couldn't explain them. They weren't cuts. Not burns, just patterns in my skin that hadn't been there before. The company gave me 2 weeks paid leave. Sent me to Anchorage for evaluation. The psychiatrist diagnosed me with a dissociative episode triggered by isolation and stress. Prescribed medication and recommended I transfer to a position with more social interaction. Standard protocol for pipeline workers who crack under the pressure. But I knew it wasn't stress. Something had happened during those 3 days. Something the static man had done to me or shown me. And pieces of it were coming back. Not as memories, as knowledge I shouldn't have. I knew things now. Technical details about the pipeline that weren't in any manual. Pressure specifications for sections I never worked on. Chemical compositions of the crude oil flowing through specific segments. And stranger things, radio frequencies that didn't exist. Mathematical formulas that produced impossible results. Names of places that weren't on any map. I started drawing, compulsively, filling notebooks with circuit diagrams and schematics for devices I couldn't identify. My hand would move automatically, creating blueprints for machines I had never seen but somehow understood on a fundamental level. Machines that dealt with electromagnetic fields and reality distortion and bridging gaps between dimensional spaces. Other workers who encountered the static man were experiencing similar phenomena. We started comparing notes quietly, meeting in Anchorage during leave time. 7 of us total, all with missing time, all with those faint circuit-like marks on our skin, all downloading information we shouldn't possess. One guy, a geologist named Pete, had started speaking in languages he never learned. Not human languages, something else. Strings of sounds that hurt to hear but conveyed complex ideas about energy transmission and consciousness transfer. Another worker, Sarah, had developed an ability to sense electromagnetic fields. She could walk into a room and tell you exactly where every electronic device was, even if it was turned off and hidden. We were being changed, upgraded. The static man wasn't just some ghost or hallucination. He was a transmission, a signal from somewhere else. And we were the receivers, our brains and bodies modified to process information that human neurology wasn't designed to handle. I found research eventually, classified stuff that took some serious digging and a few illegal database breaches. The government knew about the static man, had known since the pipeline was first constructed in the 70s. He'd been appearing to workers from the very beginning. And the phenomenon was getting stronger, more frequent, more intrusive. The theory, buried in redacted documents and coded language, was that the pipeline itself was acting as an antenna. 800 miles of conductive material running through some of the most magnetically active regions on Earth. The aurora borealis overhead, charged particles streaming down from space, and all that electromagnetic energy interacting with the pipeline infrastructure was creating something. A signal, or a doorway, or a bridge between our reality and something adjacent to it. The static man wasn't visiting from somewhere else. He was bleeding through, a manifestation of whatever existed on the other side of that electromagnetic barrier. And he was looking for a way to cross over fully, using us as test subjects, modifying our biology to see if human consciousness could survive the transition. The missing time wasn't missing. We were being taken somewhere. Our consciousness pulled through the static into that other place while our bodies wandered automatically, piloted by something else. And when we came back, we brought pieces of that other reality with us. Knowledge, abilities, changes. I went back to the pipeline in April, against the psychiatrist's recommendations, against my own better judgment. But I needed to understand. Needed to see the static man again and find out what he'd done to me during those 3 lost days. He was waiting at Station 4, like he knew I'd return, standing in the exact spot where I'd last seen him clearly. And this time, when the radio's filled with white noise and my head began to ache, I didn't resist. I opened the door, walked out into the cold, and let him touch me. His hand, if you could call it that, passed through my chest. No pain, no physical sensation, but I felt something else. A downloading, a massive transfer of information flooding into my brain faster than I could process. I saw the other side, the place beyond the static. It wasn't the place at all. It was a state, a different configuration of reality where consciousness didn't need meat and bones to exist. Where thought and energy were the same thing. Where beings like the static man lived as pure information, traveling through electromagnetic fields the way we travel through space. They'd been trying to communicate since humans first started generating radio waves. But we couldn't hear them. Not properly. Our biology was incompatible. So they'd been searching for a bridge. A way to translate their existence into terms we could understand. And the pipeline, with its unique electromagnetic properties, had given them that opportunity. They weren't hostile. They weren't trying to hurt us. They were just trying to say hello, to make first contact with another form of consciousness in a universe they thought was empty of anything like themselves. But the translation process was imperfect. Our brains couldn't handle the full bandwidth of their communication. So we experienced it as static, as lost time, as impossible memories and altered biology. The static man released me, stepped back, and for just a moment, his flickering form stabilized. I could see him clearly. Not human, not even close, but not monstrous either. Just different. So fundamentally different that looking at his true form made my eyes water and my nose bleed from the cognitive strain. Then he was gone. The radios went silent, and I was alone in the snow, holding knowledge that no human should possess. Understanding that would make me an outsider in my own species. Changed in ways I couldn't hide or undo. I quit the pipeline 2 weeks later, moved to Anchorage, tried to live a normal life. But the changes kept progressing. I can see electromagnetic fields now, can sense radio transmissions before they rebroadcast. Sometimes I pick up transmissions from the other side. The static man, this reality. They were still trying to communicate, still trying to bridge the gap. And I think they were succeeding. More sightings every year, more workers with lost time and circuit marks, more people downloading information they shouldn't have. The bridge is getting stronger, more stable. Soon it won't just be isolated contacts. Soon the barrier will thin enough for actual crossover. I don't know if that was good or bad. I don't know if humanity is ready to meet beings that exist as living static, conscious interference patterns riding electromagnetic waves across the universe. But ready or not, it is coming. The static man, I said, going away. He is multiplying. Every person he touches becomes a potential receiver. A node in a growing network of modified humans who can perceive and interact with that other reality. We being prepared, upgraded, transformed into something that can survive in both worlds. And sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I can still feel him watching me. Not threatening, just waiting, patient as only immortal consciousness can be. Waiting for enough of us to change. Waiting for the bridge to complete. Waiting for the day when static and flesh finally learn to speak the same language, and two forms of life impossibly different finally understand each other across the electromagnetic divide. I still have those notebooks, still draw those schematics, and I am starting to understand what they for. They instructions, blueprints for devices that will amplify the signal, make the bridge permanent, open the door completely. Part of me wants to destroy them, burn every page and forget what I know, but I can because another part of me, the part that was changed during those 3 lost days, knows this is inevitable. The static man found us. And now that first contact has been made, there is no going back. We were not alone in the universe. We never were. We just couldn't hear the others calling until we built the right antenna. And now that we can hear them, now that the translation process has begun, everything is about to change. And sometimes, in the noise, I can almost make out words. Almost understand what they were trying to say. Almost remember what happened during those 3 days I lost. Almost, but not quite. Not yet, but soon, very soon.